My name is John McGrath. I was born in West Newbury in 1936 and have lived here all my life except 30 years I left town and went to the West for professional career and then came back and built a house. And so in my inner self, I probably never left. I was on a long hiatus of going off to make money and bringing it back. I went to Alaska and I enjoyed that very much, but I'm much happier. I'm happy to be back, and amongst both individuals that I didn't know when I left because they were babies, well, they're now friends, but I knew their parents and their brothers and sisters. So it's like, in a way, you never left. If you have a hometown that you really, a hometown, like through high school, you can go back to it and plug in if you do it right and become part of it again and not be seen as the foreigner. Because somebody who moved here 50 years ago amongst the natives is a newcomer. So the cliche is the food mart bench. And to those who watching this that don't understand, the grocery store opens about 5 in the morning, and there are a number of male reprobates that always show up and sit on a old church pew, about a 8-foot long bench from a church or a hall, and discuss everybody's business except their own and decide who belongs and who doesn't. And so there's no way to earn yourself into it. You can have married a local girl and move into town and live here for 50 years, but you still came from someplace else. And that probably is not uncommon in smaller towns, especially in rural areas around the world, probably. So I was born in Anna Jake's Hospital, and so I claim I was born in West Newbury, but I have a friend who claims to be a West Newbury native because he's born on Merrill Street, literally. And he's a couple months older than I am, so he got to be 90 before I did this year. Before I do. My earliest memory of living in West Newbury would be teams of horses pulling hay wagons in the summer, and my father sitting me up on the hay and driving across fields, being pulled by 1 or 2 horses, depending on the wagon, that I was familiar with and considered my friends, the horses, and handing me the reins to go across the field to drive the hay into the barn. This was loose hay put on with pitchforks onto the wagon and then off the wagon with pitchforks, thrown up way high over your head into a hay mow in the barn that is now disassembled, but it belonged to the Newell Farm house, the red brick house of Captain Newell on Newell Farm Drive, which is a 1725 origin estate. It's all of the land where my house is at 244 Main Street across the street, and all the way to the beginning of the Georgetown Road. If you go in Newell Farm Drive, and then picture yourself flying over the swamps and everything and ending up at the junction of Ash Street and Georgetown Road, Maple Street. It was a 60-acre farm. My father and his brother farmed that with they had 2 teams of horses. So my memories are late World War II and just at the end. In reference to World War II and thinking through what I'm about today and what life was like in a timeline. So I was 9 years old at VJ Day. So my say I began remembering and thinking about things when I was 4, which is kind of the beginning of World War II. So say from 4 to 9, it was living in a very altered civilian society, especially along the East Coast, because there were so many German submarines offshore that coastal towns had complete blackouts every night. You couldn't have lights on in your house without pulling the shades down, and there were watchmen that would walk down the street and bang on your house door if any light was leaking through it and stuff. It was what civil defense, the term civil defense, in the modern sense, we didn't have it then, but that's what it was, because there was so much shipping lost along the Atlantic coast by German submarines. And that was never revealed to the public till about 20 years ago. So it was farming life. We had 40 cows. They did have milking machines, but then each cow had to be, the end up and to get the last of the milk out of the cow had to be done by hand. So I don't think I knew any kids, and some girl kids too, that knew how to what we call strip a cow after the machine, which is a vacuum pulse that went over the outer appendage, teat, and then you did it by hand and got another couple quarts because the machine wasn't. So I can remember being not as graceful as I was supposed to be with the cow, and the cow taking offense and realizing that I was an amateur, and pick up her right hind foot, because you always sat on the right side, and the head was in a stanchion, and gently pushing me into the manure gutter right behind off the three-legged stool. So those were just ordinary things. Cow manure was not considered a dirty substance any more than horse manure was. To this day, it does not smell offensive to me. It smells, it's nostalgic. Some friends of mine who, contemporary, live at the beginning of Georgetown Road, the farmer in that field at the end of Maple Street on the right dumped several truckloads of cow manure in the field, and the odor was beautiful. Our friends called up and said, "John, what are we going to do about this? The stink is unbearable. I can't live in my house anymore." I said, "Geraldine, it's brilliant. It's beautiful. Learn to enjoy it." So the adaptableness of the human animal. If you get it when you're young, that's what it's good. If you don't get it when you're young. So that was formative to me in ways that I didn't recognize until much later in life, when I became more reflective, 50s, 60s, 80s, 90s, of how much you're formed and in your youthful experiences. I've read where by the time you're 14 or some arbitrary number, the adults in your life have no more influence on you, that you're formed. You receive lots of guidance and patterns and prohibitions and encouragements. And you've selected some and rejected some. But when you're 14, the brain is pretty well solidified on the path. I think if we reflect, each of you, that you might find that you can see landmarks and reflect back and see how that works. I'm not here as a philosopher. I'm here as a townie. Okay. So the dairy farm and the processing of the milk both were my family's business. My mother raised 3 children, myself and my 2 sisters who are younger, both deceased now. She did all of the bookkeeping, which was no minor task, and took care of raised the children. My father didn't, he was friendly and kind and gentle, but he wasn't a hands-on parent and stuff. So anything to do with school or shopping or disciplines, that all came from the female side. And so and so she did a lot of auxiliary things that were associated with the dairy. Cloths that you use to clean and strain milk with and all of that. So she was pretty busy. In the back room of the house was the office for the dairy at 248 Main Street, where Bruce Taylor has just sold the house now. That's the house my father grew up in and I grew up in. It's been in the family since 1915. And my father moved into it then, and he would have been 10 years old. And then I moved into it in 1941 from just a couple houses down the street when his mother died there. So the length of the tail of our memory. I was talking to Richard Preble's granddaughter just now before I came here. And she got to hear the kinds of things we're talking about now, of how I remember her great-grandmother still living in the house that she now is living in at 11 Church Street. So, I see. What responsibilities did you have at home when you were young? I had none. I may have been given many, but I have been a self and solely directed person my entire life. And I have one person who wasn't affiliated with me family-wise, but it was a two-step up boss of mine in Alaska. After 20 years, I got a glowing evaluation on the skills I had of running contracts, making them come out right, and everything, and it was very generous of the gentleman that wrote it. But the final sentence in that, and I have it at home, it said, "This employee is completely unsupervisable." And I took that as a high compliment. I never did it on purpose, but I don't listen to other people. But I do think quite thoroughly and watch and observe and see models of how things are going to be, and then just go and do it that way. Deafness serves me well. In hindsight, that's a new thought. I like that. I've probably been deaf through all my whole life. So I would be assigned, that's not history of West Newbury. So I took that with pride, and I've shown it to any number of people. If you don't believe me, I'll bring you a copy. So that's the responsibilities. I suppose, what would you do in a free time and spend the summers? Well, the summers during the farm time, either on my own or other contemporaries of mine's family farms. During school time, we would generally go and help our friends do the chores they were obligated to do at their family farms. So I can remember going up Crane Street, where what you would know as maybe Sephora's greenhouse, the corner of Middle Street, and Crane Hill Street. There's an old red barn on the corner. But that belonged to a farm family, and their son, one of many sons there, was my age. And when it was bicycle time, we'd go right out of school. We'd all go, George Spencer was his name, and we'd all go and help him do his chores, because he came from a big family with a lot of kids, and the kids had to do all the work on the farm, because his father was the superintendent of streets in town at the time. So the kids did the farming. There used to be a trolley along Main Street, so I never saw it. I've seen an awful lot of pictures of it, and my father, as a young boy or man, would be hired to shovel snow. You can imagine a blizzard and a street trolley, horse-drawn first and then electric later. It had to be shoveled out, and that's all the way from Haverhill down to this building was the first turnaround, was the early run ended here. And that was at the time of the Albion Hotel, which you're familiar with. And Ray, the second house down on the left, had a huge barn next to it. Wegerson's had a huge barn next to it, and that was a storage barn for the overnight for the horses and the trolley car before it returned and took up commuters to go to Haverhill. So my early maiden aunt, Irish ancestors, they'd be grand aunts who worked in shoe shops and stuff in Haverhill, would traipse up from Sullivan's Court, lower Whetstone Street, and get on the trolley to go to Haverhill every day. So that trolley business transitioned from the shoe shops where you'd do the shoe, you go to Haverhill once a week and get the stamping cut pieces of leather and then bring them home in the little shoe shops that you are familiar with around town. There's one at the Hills House, historic. There's one on the corner. The house on faces Main Street. It's the corner of River Road. Coffin Street. There's one right there. And there's one at Brown Spring Farm in back. It's kind of dilapidated. And it just was a common way. The barn where I grew up at 248 Main Street, Bruce Taylor's, upstairs in that barn was a shoe shop. It was all pine panels, had workbenches, and I still have a glass jar full of wooden pegs that you nailed the sole on with. Yeah. I'm rambling around unthematically. You'll work it out, I guess. When I was 14, which is when you can first go to work, it was the law even then, my father made arrangements with a big dairy in Haverhill, Wasson McDonald, that had ice cream, made ice cream, and had two huge ice cream stands, one on the far side of Haverhill and one on 110 over in Amesbury across from where the concrete plant is, Shays. I had 7 windows, and I worked there in the summer I was 14. And on weekend days, there was never not a line of at least 10 people or more at each window. And we had like 15 or 20 flavors. And we had large and small cones. They were 17 cents and 24 cents or something. So a parent would come up with a large family, give you 7 different flavors of various sizes, large and small, and go off and freehand it and come back. And in your mind, you would be doing, and you'd tell them the exact price. So when I see kids giving you 2 ice cream cones and rated, doing this, and that's X dollars, I think, man, come on, kids. What are you doing in your spare time? But while you're scooping cones, you're supposed to be doing arithmetic. I did that, and the next summer, when I was 15, you may have heard of Hale's Dog House. It's where Nick's sandwich shop is across from Pawtucket now. But there's like 4-generation back family in the house immediately this side of Nick's, this modest house. And that family was locally well known for hot dogs and homemade root beer, Hya's root beer. So they buy the extract. They have Yes'em, it's Essem hot dogs. That was the brand.
What were they called?
Essem. But on the package, Yes'em, yes ma'am, it's Essem. And so I would ride my bicycle up there, or my mother would take me up there around noon every day. Mrs. Hearn was the gym teacher in school, and her husband, Edville, worked at Havel Electric. So I would open it up, make the next day's root beer, go into the cellar of the house, and in large milk jugs, get the previous day's Hya's root beer that was made from the extract, dump it into quart mason jars for presentation, bring it over, and start having customers come. So it was grilled hot dogs, grilled buns, X number of condiments, and homemade root beer. You had homemade root beer ever? Oh, you should. You can still buy Hires extract, I believe. It's just lovely. Lovely stuff. It's sassafras flavor. Had a sassafras tree in our yard once. You pull out the root, and you think you're eating root beer. The chemistry in the sassafras tree is root beer. Perhaps it's where the basic, that's off track. So, the season, how did the Ephesians, they were a big deal. Because the summer was the smell of cut hay, hay drying, chaff, loose hay, in the barn with oven-like heat, throwing the hay onto the mow. But it was a lovely, encompassing, friendly odor and atmosphere. And then you go into what's basically the cellar. Most cattle barns, not nowadays, they're high production things, but they have the hay above and the cattle at ground level. And so you got to live with that hay all winter, because twice a day, every day, you go up and pitch off some, drop it down through a trap door on the upstairs floor, and losing thought process. Halloween was a lovely time because there was a lot of minor damage done at the time, and the boys, mostly boys from 12 to 20, were quite outrageous in what they would do. And that was the end of the era of outhouses. So plenty of families still had an outhouse. Well, tipping over an outhouse was amongst the highest mark you could get as a young rowdy. How many outhouses did you tip over Halloween night? So there was a fellow in town up by the Second Congregational Church. The house is no longer there. And he got so tired of it, as the cycle of maybe I lived in that age group through 5 years or something. He sat in it with a shotgun, and every once in a while he'd step out and shoot it into the air. So that was fun. And Wesley Clark, he was, people who are slightly different anyways, then they're, kids are mean. They go after the weakling or the oddity. And so, but he was no pushover. He would shoot into the air. I can remember another time we had an outhouse strapped to the back of the car, taking it up Pipestave Hill for some reason. And we didn't have any good sense at all. We'd be standing on the back bumper of the car, holding the outhouse on, driving it, or getting in a hay wagon and stealing hay wagons out of farmyards and pushing them down the street and taking them to a hill someplace to coast down the hill in the hay wagon, because you had no control over it. They'd run off the side of the road and tip over or hit a tree or something. Nobody got killed, but they certainly didn't show a lot of self-preservation judgment on doing those things. Driving was, when you got 16, most of the kids, especially around farms, everybody had already been driving for 3 or 5 years in fields or tractors. Some places had tractors. Or the older guys would say, we were working in the field, they'd say, I'm 12 or something, and go get my car. It's up in so-and-so's field. You get on your bike and ride up there, put your bike in the car and drive it back down Main Street at 13 years old or something. There's no permanent police department. There were no police officers. Growing up as World War II, that's what I've been thinking about that I wanted to do. So I knew no different than my mother made soap from fat and lye, and all food was by coupons, like theater tickets, old-fashioned tickets. So you go to the store and you're allowed X amount of sugar, X amount of no butter. That's when oleo margarine came in, and the law required it couldn't be pre-colored, so it couldn't fake itself as butter. So it came white in a sack, and inside the sack was a little enclosure this size of dye. So you take this sack and knead it and bust that button inside, so that whenever you put it on the table, it was butter color. But for regulation to prove that you weren't using butter, which was a military thing, you bought oleo margarine. That's where the word comes from. And oleo, I think, is a Latin or something for fat or oil, and I think there's a connection to that. And tires, gasoline, you were allowed maybe 10 gallons a week or something, all with regulation from coupons. And that's how the government managed to keep most natural resources and materials available for the war effort. That all seemed very natural. I mean, that's informative. So to this day, I'm penurious about spending money on things or wasting or eating all the leftover food in the refrigerator. We're all products of our earlier years. And so that very much formed my generation of people, most of us, the ones that got a close-up look at it or paid attention. So it seemed natural until then VJ Day. I guess that was the second one, wasn't it? VE was first. And I remember people running out onto the street and hollering and jumping up and down and very happy. But if your whole life has been altered measurably for the last 5 years, then people of all ages are going to be quite relieved that there was reason to look forward to better times. And this was a generation, my parents had just come out of the Depression. So I had parents, Depression parents. Well, that gets a little bit of imprinting on the children too. So even if there hadn't been World War II, the children of we're known as the silent generation, the children of the Depression era parents, we're going to have one level of it, but then you add your child during the war, especially on the East Coast. If you live in Iowa, I don't know what it was like, but certainly on the East Coast, it had a day-to-day, daily influence on an awful lot of stuff. So school lunches were atrocious. The government would send like 10 bags of cornmeal to the cellar of the 1910 building where the ladies from town ran the cafeteria, cooked all the food. There's no such thing as packaged food. They just got sacks of raw material and a water supply. They made everything. The only guaranteed good thing was my father delivered 80 or 100 little bottles of milk every day from the dairy for the school lunch, and you got to choose chocolate if you liked. which was quite a big deal for a lot of kids that had never had an opportunity, because plenty of kids in town lived in very penurious circumstances. I remember girls with flour. Chicken feed would come in printed material and cotton sacks that was intended to be reused to make girls' clothing. So if I look back at my first and second and third grade pictures, class pictures, you see those homemade dresses made of chicken sack. Yeah. But it was a better time. Having experienced what we've all experienced since then, we're corrupted. But if we could simplify our brains and erase a whole bunch of stuff and go back to that much slower speed and more fundamental and more real, happiness and mental health would be greatly enhanced, greatly enhanced. I observe, that's my own thoughts, but I travel back and forth across North America multiple times, motorcycle, driving, camper trailer, 20 times. And unless there was something specific, I would use the interstate. But if I had time, I would always drive the 113s and the bachelor streets and go across the country that way, and stop in small towns and go to family restaurants and stuff like that. And I observed, this would have been in the 70s and 80s, that you can socially and culturally and speed of life wise, you can drive 1,000 miles and go back 40 years socially, right now, today. I think I mentioned that to you before. And I went to Wentworth in Boston, and was around Boston. And then associated with my Alaska career, I was in Seattle and did business in Seattle a lot. Seattle was 20 years behind Boston in speed, noise, immediacy, stuff. In Seattle, people walked down the street and said hello, even if they didn't know you, you know what I mean? Kind of thing. So where we are at any given, I'm getting too philosophical here.
Huh? You can get philosophical.
Where we are and what we choose and how we want to situate ourselves, if it becomes important to us, we can make that happen. If we have the circumstances. Not everybody can do it because there's all other kind of social, financial, and otherwise limitations. But like I said, I never followed instructions. So I have tried to live by G.A.R. You know who he is? Yeah. A catcher for maybe the New York Yankees. And he was famous for one-liners that seemed to not make sense, but they were philosophical. And well, somebody named G.A.R. immediately puts a picture in your mind anyway. And he said stuff like, never go down a dead-end street. Oh, don't take the fork in the road till you come to it. Those have a lot of meaning if you want to have fun with them. And so, you know, some people said, a week from next Thursday, I'm going to do such and such. One person is locked into that. They never have a choice to change their mind because they have a schedule. And it's externally imposed upon them, but they buy into it so deeply. I wasn't going to come here today till I got in the truck and drove no, you know what I mean? So schedules are really bad things for, let's see what it, schooling as I mentioned, was the 1910 building. And the 1910 building's longest name was Central School. It's now called the 1910 building because that's when it was built, and it's not a school. But it was some decision point had been made by the town to consolidate the 8, I think it was, outlying one-room schoolhouses where you walked to school on Turkey Hill Road or Crane Hill or wherever, and there were maybe 8 of them around town. Some of them are they're homes now, most of them still up. And then you went to high school, the West Newbury High School on what is now Marshall Drive. There's photos which I have show that West Newbury High School is a separate standalone building about 100 feet back from Main Street on what is now Marshall Drive, right in the middle.
Marshall Drive is right across from where I live, right?
Yes, it is. Well, the high school was there. And my father graduated from high school there in 1923 or 24. But the state condemned the building as unsafe. And the population of the town had been plummeting since the streetcars come in and the workers could go to Haverhill and not live here, and you didn't have as many local crafts and supply places here, so there were less jobs. So the school population diminished things. So that building was underutilized for the 8 grades. So because the high school was condemned, so in 1925 they started having high school kids. So it was 1 through 12 in that building. So that just became the normal. And when I then was there in the was a freshman in 1950 or something, it was just, everybody knew it to be the 12-year school. Until then, anyways, so that building had torn down, which is the high school. And where was I headed with that?
Did you talked to me last week about going to school in Newburyport briefly? You talked to me last week about going to school in Newburyport briefly?
Yeah.
They moved the West Newbury students over?
Yeah. So, yes. So the 1910 building, these stories, if we had a graph here on the wall and it showed the population of the town along a timeline, the stories, like especially with the school, you can see the correlation between population and what's happening. Driven to build Pentucket. It wasn't just because somebody had an idea, let's have a regional school. It was the growth of populations, and it was such that it created a public need that couldn't be avoided. What did you say?
Newburyport.
Oh, so then in 1951, I guess, I was in the 9th grade, and the building was already way too crowded. So by then, it's another post-World War II baby boom kids. And so we were tuitioned out to Newburyport High School. The Newburyport was a shrinking population base, the city. The Newburyport High School, that same building you see now, had Rowley, Newbury, Salisbury, West Newbury to fill up the classroom to help with revenue to be able to support the school system and the teachers. So I and my cohorts from the 9th grade, the next school year, got on a bus and went to Newburyport High School, as did the kids 1 year younger than me who would become freshmen. I went down there as a sophomore. And in talking to you the other day about this, Corinne, I forgot to reflect on, I have sense of the kids who went to the 1910 building for 11 years and had to go that 12th year at Newburyport High School. That was devastating. So a lot of the students, not a lot, a significant number, a measurable amount of students didn't survive the social transfer of going from a class of 16 in a building of, in a high school of total population of 50, and living on farms and doing stuff, and end up going to Newburyport, a urban city kids. It worked for some, but it certainly didn't work for everybody. So the number of dropouts, and I ended up in prep school because I didn't survive there, social, not antisocial or anything. It was just, it was like sending a 12-year-old on a bus to New York City and telling them to buy 7 pizzas and bring them back to West Newbury. You know what I mean? It was just too much new, too much social skill that had never developed. When you're worried about getting the hay in the barn, and the boys go. At the time I left the 1910 building school for recesses and everything, there was boys went in one end of the building and the girls went in the other. But we didn't even able to. It was so puritanical. Get that, yeah. The boys' door and the girls' door. It wasn't it was like, and anyways, so that was a big thing. And I don't know how long that lasted and when Pentucket began, but there must have been 6 or 8 class years, if not more, of kids going to Newburyport. But if you, anyways, it didn't work for me. Well, if you drive down there now, not a lot has changed. The shop studio that your mother had, the half of it that's nearest here, the east side, had always been a drugstore. And it had a druggist there, so you could have prescriptions filled in it. And it had a grand soda fountain, marble tops, stools, and that persisted for quite a while. And real soda, you know, like you'd see in a movie of the 30s. And so we had fraps and sodas, and no sodas, fraps or milkshakes. Frap had ice cream and a milkshake didn't. But real syrup, I mean, real syrup, real vanilla was poured into the vanilla shake. You tasted vanilla like you were eating, I don't know, something that had vanilla flavoring in it. And it was the social political coffee clutch for the men of town that were the men of leisure of town, the politicians. The guy, Dick Birkenbush, owned a gas station across the street, but he didn't work at it. So he was my grandfather, who retired back to town, who was born here in 1890, and he'd been off in a professional life. And Albert Elwell, I don't know if you know that name. Excuse me. He would be there. So there would, and the priest walked down from the parsonage up on Maple Street, and he would sit there and have his bromo seltzer every morning. We called him Father Bromo. And that was the thing. And then in summer evenings, kids would congregate, say from 12 years old to 18 years old, in the street out front and holler at cars, take the pants off a guy and run him up the telephone pole, get a frap, just generally do stuff like that. Back to where your mother's thing is, I kind of broke away from that. So that, in my first recollection, was a soda fountain, and the soda fountain was run by a druggist. So it was both, a drugstore. In this half, in the far half of the building, was, believe it or not, an A&P grocery store, and run by a local guy. And then it was named Henry's Spar. Spar like in, you know what I mean, a spa.
SPA.
Yeah. And Henry was Henry Woods. And then he left or died, and a fellow named L. Beaumont bought it or took it over. I don't know who owned the building. And I forget what the grocery store became, a real estate office, I think. And then, but the soda fountain side and the drugstore side stayed effective. And then a guy named William Harriman bought the building on that, and he kept the soda fountain kind of, no more drugstore, and opened it up the way it is now to all one space. Sold work clothes, had a pinball machine, and so all of these times were still being hangouts for the kids on summer nights and stuff. I guess he was still doing coffee. Yes, he was. And so by the time, that's the last I knew of what was there. Then I came back to town, and Roxanne had the frame shop, and Bob Chiller had the photo shop. Yeah, the photo shop. And it was a center of day and evening activities for a lot of years.
You talked about, last week you talked about Outback. Yeah, the far back side of town.
Oh, yes. Well,
Outback.
the people I'm speaking about, they were all, we call them the Urbanites of West Newbury, that lived within bicycle or walking distance of the square. So my lifelong friend of mine was John Thurlow of Cherry Hill Nursery family. We went to, he was the exact months apart in age. None of that for him nor the kids that lived out that part of town. I call it the Newbury part of town, the Episcopal part of town. They were never part of this life down here. So we were the urban kids, and they were the rural kids in the small world that we're in. We're the sophisticates, right? We see the Hudsons go by. They don't. Oh, the Packards. They don't go by the houses of the kids that live over back. All they see are old run-down Model A pickup, Ford pickups. But I see West Newbury that way. So as the territorial and human history of West Newbury is an expansion of Newbury. And Newbury, its origin, of course, is Puritan Pilgrim times, 1635 at Parker River at Lower Newbury Green. So with the need for land for agriculture and hunting, you get the natural expansion and spread to where people are in what is now West Newbury, but it had been Western Newbury. So my friend John Thiller was one of those, and there's plenty of families to this day that trace back to Old Newbury. Well, not plenty, but several. If you talk to Richard Thurlow, you'll pick up more on this, because his family is from the 1600s, from that era. So those folks were Puritans, pre-revolutionary, and then for contrast, I might be jumping over a little bit, I come along in the 1850s with my English shopkeepers and mechanics, and Irish, my two sides of my family, and rowdy Irish, uneducated, fleeing the difficulties of Ireland. So we go from the religion side, you go from the Puritans, which I don't know what it would equate to today, whether Congregationalists, I suppose. And then the Church of England, the non-Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were a religious group that left England, ended up in Holland for 20 years, and then later came to North America. So those are the Plymouth Rock people. That's a very fundamental Christian thing. But a lot of Church of England people came also. So you get the Episcopalians, which is equivalent to the Church of England. So that's why we have multiple. We have the Episcopal Church. It's generically, in the big picture, Protestant, meaning Protestant from Martin Luther, but and then you had Baptists and Methodists and Congregationalists. And they were all getting along just fine, and the Catholics showed up. And while I don't know of any documented stories of stuff like that, I have a hearsay of my grand uncle burning a cross once or twice on people's lawns. Yeah. Grand uncle, no. Yeah. Yes, my grandfather's brother. Yeah. And so there was tension. And I can remember standing in the square, 13 years old or something. The priest walked through with his cassock, whatever you call it, long black thing. And a bunch of wise guys taunting him about wearing a dress. So I forgot that my theme on this. I'm not as good on hanging on themes today as sometimes, but
You're doing fine. You're doing fine.
Thank you. So it's a whole, if I could button it, put it in a coherent sequence, just the religious hyphen social circumstances in this town and plenty of others. But I think we may have, the Newburyport has a lot of Irish, and Haverhill, so I guess a lot. I don't think of Groveland as having many Irish. So I mentioned to Corinne, like the bronze plaque over here about the Civil War. If you look at the names on it, there's one MC. So in 1860, my great-grandfather was naturalized, and great-great-grandfather was naturalized in 1850, but he didn't join. And there were Irish people in the Civil War from New York City and stuff, but there must be 80, 90 names on that list, and there's none here. But both sides of my father's family, McGrath and Sullivan, were here, and none of those guys went. I don't need to apologize, but I'm disappointed a little bit that I'm not. Don't quite have it together today.
I disagree. I disagree.
Okay. You're very...
No, you're doing great. And plus, anything
That's why we have a professional editor here,
Yes.
right? You grab the snippets and the good stuff
Yeah.
and repackage me, and I come out. Should we talk about AI for a while?
Let's.
I read a lot. I have subscriptions to the Atlantic Monthly, New York Times, Washington Post, and The Guardian. So that's where my points of view come from. And mostly I read opinion columns. So AI has been is such a hot topic now. I read a piece in, well, we get the New York Sunday Times for the crossword puzzle, but so I was reading in their opinion section a long piece by an essay by a sophomore at Stanford University about AI and how it affects the classroom and how the students are comfortably now signing a waiver say they didn't use AI for their essay, but on the screen, split screen, they are using it. And visualizing phenomena in the sense of progressions and rates of progressions and organicness and how one begets two, two beget four, the geometric progressions. Just free float thinking, you can see not a deliberate, benign, thoughtful entity, but just the mathematicalness of it expanding and there having to be no control or no coherent control or targeted control. So it's like standing on the edge of a cliff and wondering if the person with the parachute is going to show up pretty soon or not. So I think of it in the terms of, I'll call them my grandchildren, they're not biologically, but Luke Dushman, who's a junior, and his sister Sienna, who's a freshman. Both good, serious students, lovely family, Peg's son's kids, which we interact with a lot. And my trying to imagine what their next 5-10 years is going to be like. Well, I know, I forgot. So the essay was, well, I already said it, the sophomore at Stanford was writing a rather long essay that was in the New York Times about the AI phenomena. Fortunately for me, I don't try to understand the details of it. I certainly couldn't find a way to utilize it if I was interested, but I can think of it as a phenomena and delve into the inevitableness of human nature and now an abstraction of human nature, how they develop. So one doesn't have to be specifically knowledgeable of using it as a tool to understand the impact it can have. Well, it's like dandelions growing in your lawn. You pick out one because it makes the lawn look bad. You come back tomorrow and you found you've engendered 50 because you broke one. So you mow those today, and tomorrow you wake up and look out the window and there's 200. You don't know what it is, the magic behind it that's making, oh, should I stop mowing? Should I mow more? Should I mow shorter? Oh, well, it's like that. It's a phenomena that is on the cusp of having a life of its own if it doesn't already.
It's probably pretty amazing to think because 90 years ago when you were growing up in West Newbury, computers weren't even a thing on the imagination. And now you have artificial intelligence.
That, I used to think about that as a concept with my father's life and my grandfather's life, both. And now I can do it with my own. So some of the landmarks are wooden pencils with a pencil sharpener to do math problems in grade school, or we'll call it junior high school in West Newbury. Going to Wentworth for a very condensed 4-year engineering study done in 2 years, but no liberal arts stuff. And pick up on the slide rule and log tables, logarithm tables. Going to work in the field engineering in '62, surveying and that sort of thing out in construction site layouts. We had to measure up a hill, for example, with an actual metal strap that had foot increments impressed on it. With at the end, it only had hundredths of feet. So it's on a slope, and all measurements of land are horizontal distances. So you got 276.52 feet on a slope. So you have to, with a transit, look and see what the vertical angle is, and then you have to use a trig function to get the horizontal. You're looking at the hypotenuse, now you need the adjacent side because you know the angle. So you carry the log tables, which are a book this size, this tall, out in the field, and go through and get the log for that angle, to add it and to determine what the horizontal length is. Then one day, somebody came into the office, this was in '73, and they had a Hewlett-Packard HP 35, which had the entire log table in it. You could do that with that little thing like this. Hewlett-Packard became the new god, literally, of a whole group of professions and people. That was before, so that was the high point there. And then we started buying for the transits. We started getting German Zeiss lens. I forget the transit name. And it resolved a lot of these functions within this little green thing that sat on the tripod. But so I still have my slide rule. It's one of my waypoints of life. Yeah, a 10-inch K&E, and you always had to calibrate it. It's a slide stick in the middle and a stick on top and bottom with vinyl, probably bamboo, and then with vinyl, and then a metal bracket on each end. So in a slide glass for the thing. So before you take a test or anything, you look at it, and if it's off, you bang it on the edge of your chair to get the top line calibrated with the bottom line, so that when you look up 35.7 degrees, you get the right logarithm down below. If you couldn't use the slide rule, you might as well leave Wentworth. You couldn't move 5 feet without, and all of my professors were famous for the 90-second last minute zip quiz before you left the room. If you didn't have a slide rule, you were really fast with it. You're out, you're done, yeah. I had there's one more step though, it wasn't at the end. And then we move along, and I didn't adopt the computer because I was very much in the 80s when the first Mac came out, because I had a secretary I never keyboarded to this day. And I was administrative, professional, telling other people what to do kind of thing, and contract administration, contract verifications, and that sort of thing. So I slid along semi-blinded until 2007, when the world began. You want to know what happened in 2007 when the world began? You do. Do you?
It was the housing crash.
Huh?
The market issues with the housing.
No. We're talking technology.
Oh, yeah.
iPhone. That's the day the world began. It is, if you think about it. The access available. I had a computer and a Windows thing and DSL, you had to get on the telephone line and plug it into the wall phone socket and stuff for a while to facilitate. I took a bunch of trips to Europe on motorcycles, and my best way to communicate with my guide company over there was I got a computer, but so what really opened the door and made the difference is 2007 was the iPhone. Before that, you only had the BlackBerry, and that was special nerds only kind of had BlackBerries. A Canadian company of, what's this, it's got a cute name, something like We're Not Very Smart or something like that. They've got an ordinary kind of name, the Canadian company that developed the BlackBerry. Richard Preble had one.
Did he?
And my nephew had one. The only two people I know.
But you didn't get one. You didn't get one.
No, because I was doing selectman stuff then. I didn't care. The selectmen were always, in my youth, my folks would mention them. We would know we would know them, of course. And some would come to my father, who was well respected around town, and ask for his support. So, being in business, he was shy about it, but do it for good friends. So I came back to town in '92 and bought the land where my house is now. And Robin Shively was a selectman. He had just been re-elected, and he had family problems, so he decided he didn't want to continue to be, so he resigned and came to my house and asked me if I would run to fill his seat, which I did, and against several other people, and prevailed. So here I was, really, I'd been back in town for 9 months, and now I'm a selectman.
And weren't you living in a camper building your house?
Huh?
Weren't you living in a camper and building your house?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. I had a 23-foot fifth wheel camper. It had been my home for 5 years since I left Seattle. And so I did that. Everything I do, I jump in full first, and I don't necessarily yield to people who've been here longer. I'm just as much a selectman as the people who've been there for 20 years. So I tend to rub a couple people the wrong way of doing that. So. But it's like the Yogi Berra thing and the evaluation of an unmanageable. But I can personally hang on the fact that I'm inscrutably honest and not self-serving. And if I'm remembered for anything, that's what I want it to be. That I will put myself at quite an inconvenience to do the right thing, even though it's no benefit to me, but I think of it in the abstract as the right thing, of being kind and gentle and thoughtful of others. And so I did that through the rest of that term, and it expired in '96. And I'd like to have re-ran, but the two people on the board at the time were like that, the votes are 2-1. I was wanting to make things better in different ways, and so I didn't. So then I waited and ran again in 2006, which I think I accomplished some good things there and saved the town hundreds of thousands of dollars a couple different times on modifying contracts, because I have a history and a knowledge of contracting and public works, which the other people didn't. One was a cook and one was a mailman, so they don't really have a lot of chops upon which to tell a contractor or a builder or a consultant, no. So right after World War II, and I think it must have happened in lots of small towns, or many small towns, off-Broadway caliber actors and actresses from New York somehow created theater companies and moved for the summer into towns that had the right set of circumstances, housing available, and a building, the town hall across the street, and did what was called summer stock. And we had that in West Newbury. And so amateur and beginning actors and young actors and actresses, and each would have put on a play every week, 3 or 4 days worth over the weekend in here, a real Broadway stage theater play. And they would practice in the nice weather outside on the training field. So you're driving through town and you see the ladies and the guys sitting on the lawn on blankets, and they got their scripts in front of them. And I can remember going, and I was 12 and 13 years old about that time, and working with one uncle or another on haying. So I went to buy a ticket because I was interested in what was going on there. And the nice lady in the left window, towards we look at the front of the building, which was the ticket window over there, the little platform. Where did you get your money, sonny, little boy? I earned it haying. So they gave me a free ticket for the front row. But there were people who you'd see on TV. They were that substantial. That went on, must be for 4 or 5 years. And they were so outsiderness like people that they were warmly accepted in town. You know what I mean?